Innovation for health is everything it takes to reach more people differently in things that are going to create their health and wellness. It can include new service delivery options where we suddenly adopt new ways where people have to travel less far or less frequently to a facility. They have more tools and decisions in their own control. It can include policies like the TRIPS policies that provided the platform for negotiating better access to antiretroviral drugs, HIV treatment drugs at way lower prices. And frankly, innovation always needs to include leadership. But I think it's really true. If we don't have political leadership for innovation, things just don't move as fast. Wow, there have been many, because I think one thing about the HIV response has been continual innovation. And I guess at the top of that is really this idea that high expectations and not settling for less drive transformational ideas and practice. I think one of the core elements at the center in our HIV response has been really focusing on and empowering communities to lead. So communities and community-led organizations of affected people for affected people. As much progress as we've made together, and we've made a lot in the HIV response, there are still a lot of pain points. Pain points include people are still dying of HIV. Nearly 800,000 people lost their lives in 2018 alone from HIV. And those numbers will go up if we don't ensure continuity of HIV services during COVID. We know in sub-Saharan Africa in particular that reaching adolescent girls and young women with HIV prevention and comprehensive combination services is key and critical. We know that the lack of gender equity and gaps in rights really get in the way of reaching these young women. And we know that as much as there is a rights gap for young women, there's a service gap for young men. We've got to look at technology as game changers, policies as game changers, and frankly, a human rights and equity context as game changers as well. So many, and I think a lot of innovations that came from HIV are already being used in the COVID response, but we have to leverage and expand on them even more. Number one, I think, is really coming back to this idea and this premise of community-led and investing in community-led infrastructure of people most affected for people most affected. What does that mean? It means making sure we've got community-led organizations and representatives at the governance or policy tables, at the service delivery resources, and at the accountability or monitoring level. But we've seen a real gap in community-led seats at the governance and decision-making and policy tables, and I think that's something we need to strengthen for COVID. So, when it comes to the HIV lessons, we absolutely know that there are false paradigms. One false paradigm that we've seen bubbling up in COVID is this idea that we have to have some sort of balance or trade-off between the public health response and a rights-based response. But the reality is, and we know this absolutely from the history of the HIV response, that the only and most effective public health response for these epidemics is in fact a rights-based response. There is no false, sort of trade-off there. You absolutely can have restrictions on people that are also rights-based. Those restrictions then need to be based on evidence. They have to be transparent, time-limited, and non-draconian. Those are all possible even with strong COVID restrictions, but they have to be taken into account to do them right if it's going to be rights-based. Wow, I think There are a few things that are critical drivers of innovation. Number one is high expectations and not being willing to accept the status quo. There has to be some sort of outrage or vision that says we can do better, we can do simpler, we can do more, we can have better outcomes. And so what's the other ingredients that sort of make that happen? It can be starting to create spaces to connect the dots in new ways, making bridges that become idea bridges that sort of bust people out of their sort of siloed concept of a solution and then create something new.